The Spot is a multifunctional gallery and podcast factory dedicated to urban art and culture based in Geneva, Switzerland. Our mission is to provide a platform where artists feel respected and promoted while sharing their stories, the stories of the oppressed, the stories of the unheard. During the month of September 2020, we are hosting a series of portraits by up-and-coming mixed-race photographer Theo Gold. The exhibition is called We the People. We the People seamlessly fuses works from his three major projects to date, taken in Sao Tome, Cuba and Portugal. Though they have very different subject matters, they hold in common the diverse nature of Black experience within distinct societies and cultures. My name is Omar Chanan. I'm your host, and this is the first episode of Art at the Spot. Theo, welcome to the Spot. Before getting into a question, actually, I'm going to ask you maybe to go by alphabetical order and describe the stunning series of photographs here. And the first one being Anger, which we have used as the title photograph for our flyers to promote We the People as an exhibition. Tell us a little bit more about Anger.
Hey Omar, it's really great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I want to talk to you about this first image, Anger. The image is of my good friend Shay, who I met in Lisbon. He's from London, born in London, he's like British Nigerian. And the way that I kind of approached the shoot that I did with him is, it was actually over a long period of time we'd had conversations about structural racism and the way that the criminal justice system kind of goes after young people of colour. And he's got some very strong opinions about it, mostly because he's kind of lived that life. You know, the way that he looks, he's a very large Black guy, and he effectively, you know, is a target because of the way that he looks. You know, he's tall, he's muscular, you know, he can look quite mean, you know, but that is just the way he looks. But knowing him, he is honestly the complete opposite of that. You know, he's a hugely accomplished guy, you know, having come from, you know, pretty normal backgrounds in London. You know, he's had multiple lives, more than almost anybody else that I know. You know, he's produced, you know, music videos of a lot of people you would have heard of. He was a property developer for a while as well. And then after the 2007 credit crunch, he taught himself how to cook. And, you know, he's become, I mean, he was a private chef, you know, doing events for, you know, Adidas and Reebok and all these like really big brands and everything. You know, he's like taken over the Louvre for an evening and like done like amazing like taste experiences. And this is kind of not really the impression that you get just by looking at him. So the immediate kind of thought that I had when doing this shoot with him was, how do I kind of capture the fact that he is not simply the person that you see, but he is everything kind of behind that as well. So this is actually a series that I did. This was one of the last shots that we did. And he, over the years, has kind of told me stories about, you know, the way that the police in the UK, and also in, because he lived in Paris, he lived in Berlin as well, and now in Portugal. The way that the police in all these countries, especially in the UK, but I guess it's mostly because he's had more experience there, go after young men of colour, and, you know, they kind of really try to tag you in a way. You know, the police go after you. You know, the criminal justice system behind that kind of goes after you as well. And there's kind of it's a system which is designed to trip you up, and it's really unfair. And I mean, I've been caught up in it as well, you know, for doing almost nothing. And, you know, it also the equivalent of, you know, everybody else. I was with a group of 10 people, they were all doing the same thing as well. And I was the only one who was of colour and was the one that got caught. And he's been telling me things, you know, which I'm not going to get into because I don't think that's exactly the point of this. But I wanted to kind of capture his feelings towards structural racism and kind of society's attitude towards young black men. So what I did, I said, what I want you to do is to shout. I don't want you to pretend like you're shouting, you know, because I never feel that you quite get the effect. But I want you to actually shout. And we did this in my studio in Lisbon, and he shouted so loudly that we had the neighbours knocking on the door, people in the street checking that he was okay. You know, like people like honestly thought that he was in true pain. And yes, it was kind of just like the way that it kind of felt to me during the shoot, that it was all this kind of like pent up anger that he had and frustration, and he was kind of somehow getting that out. And to me, that's what the photo really, really captures.
As people enter into the spot, they are greeted and they are welcomed by this photograph of a young boy eating a mango. Can you tell us a little bit more about that one?
Boy eating mango. This was taken in a place called Sao Tome and Principe, which is kind of south of Nigeria, in the middle of the Atlantic. It's kind of just above the equator. And it's these islands which are... They weren't inhabited by humans at all until the Portuguese were sailing past. You know, it was just kind of animals and birds and whatever else that was there at the time. And it's like kind of colloquially known as the African Galapagos. You know, the people there are very poor, as you can probably imagine. You know, the country itself doesn't even have a credit rating, so you can't even use a credit card within the entire country. But the people are absolutely 100% the most kind and generous people I've ever come into contact with. They, you know, they kind of have everything they need, and they're happy. They're super happy people. You know, it's only small. It's very, very, very small. I mean, I think there's 100,000 people on both islands. And, you know, they live a kind of very simple lives. There aren't flat screen TVs in almost any house. You know, everybody knows how to fish. Everybody knows how to farm. And because it's kind of volcanic soil as well, it's unbelievably green. You know, you drop a scene and like a week later there's a tree there, do you know what I mean? So I kind of went there, I knew a little bit about it because I'd researched a tiny little bit. It was basically it was one of the places where the Portuguese used to grow things like coffee, cocoa and sugarcane. And because it was so fertile, it was a huge moneymaker for the Portuguese over many years. And after the revolution in Portugal, you know, I think it was 1974, the Portuguese basically just, you know, left. Originally they brought over people from places like Angola, Guinea-Bissau, to kind of work on the plantations, and obviously for a long period they were slaves. They were obviously freed, I think, kind of towards the end of the 19th century. And when I went there, the people were kind of still living the same kind of life as they would have under slavery, without the kind of slave masters, if that makes sense. So the people are still living in, you know, there would be like a principal house, they call it the Casa Principal. And then they would have like a little village kind of off that, with like the houses that they build themselves. And, you know, it'd have like a very small kind of like, you know, doctor's surgery. It's not really a doctor's surgery. I think there's one hospital on the whole island. which is not very well equipped. And, the people kind of just, the kids run around and they're completely free, because there's very little crime on the island, kind of maybe a little bit of petty theft. But, the thing that kind of really stuck out to me, this whole project, was the fact that, in the West, we kind of overcomplicate things so much, and kind of almost the more accepted and the more kind of cultured thing is to kind of be more complicated, with technologies, all these kind of things. And when it comes to Sao Tome, it's kind of almost the opposite. And it was a really good lesson for me, actually. It was the fact that, the greatest luxury in life is the luxury of simplicity. If you have these, beautiful places to live, you don't really need anything. And you have enough food to eat. And I was just walking through one of these plantations. I'd taken some photos before. And there was this kid who was the kid in the photo, and he was with his little brother. And, they were kind of like, who is this? They kind of thought I was white, which is quite funny. Who is this person? As I was walking through with Mariana, my girlfriend. And they were very shy, but they were kind of very curious. And I said, can I take your photo? So we did a couple of things. If you actually look at the feed of the photos, none of them are in focus because he just couldn't keep still. He had this kind of piece of mango in his hand, which was almost melting because it was hot, and also because he was kind of squeezing it and everything and just kind of sucking on the seed. And the whole time I was trying to get him to do things, and he wasn't doing it at all. And I somehow managed to capture. He basically just put a little bit of mango in his mouth, and he was kind of chewing it, and somehow that was the photo. And to me, it kind of really captured the essence of, what it would be like to grow up in a place like Sao Tome, where you have these like beautiful, simple luxuries in life. So that's that.
Now I want to go to what I think is the most disturbing photograph of them all, where you see this individual with the head wrapped in a rope. It's called claustrophobia, and it is disturbing because I really don't know how to interpret it. What's the story behind claustrophobia, Theo?
I did this. It wasn't really planned. It was kind of like I was thinking about it, and it was the way that I've kind of like grown up is I kind of straddled two different worlds. I kind of grew up in a kind of, I went to private school. There were almost no black people in my private school whatsoever. Yet, I kind of, live in that world. I know a lot of people in that world. I kind of navigate that world pretty well. Yet, obviously, kind of having not fit in properly, and kind of having to deal with, people's opinions about what you should be and what you are, and kind of, trying to work out who I am in a world where I didn't really have anyone to look up to. And, the way that I kind of felt was that, the world generally, not just the world, that I kind of grew up in, has this kind of like ingrained in their psyche that black people are a particular way, whether it's in popular culture, movies, films, music or whatever. And it's kind of like, if that is in the culture, then that's what we must be, and that is, over-sexualized, hyper-sexualized, aggressive, often criminals or whatever. Whereas I am not, and I would probably suggest that the vast majority of black people are not those things. Yet a very small minority, which is the thing that kind of sells, in popular culture, has kind of ascribed that as the kind of like going definition of a black person. So this was I think I mentioned to you, it was a self-portrait, and the kind of idea of putting the rope around me, obviously a rope is a very symbolic thing for anyone who's black, for obvious reasons, and it really kind of does lead to a sense of claustrophobia, so you walk into a room and everybody already immediately has an idea of what they think you are. And, it seems incredibly unfair to me. So that's kind of what that photo is about.
Maybe less disturbing, but I would say quite intriguing. The next picture I want to talk about with you and listen to the story behind it is confusion.
I have to say, I mean, it's kind of, the two, confusion and claustrophobia, kind of go together. So confusion is a photo of my little brother, Tommy. And again, it kind of relates to both of us kind of straddling two different worlds. I mean, he is slightly more light-skinned than I am, passes much more easily for, white or tanned or whatever you want to call it, than I do. But we spoke about it, and it's kind of, we kind of live in this kind of society where, people are not really openly racist so much anymore. I mean, it does happen, but, people do, there's kind of like this huge lack of understanding, and as a result, it's kind of quite difficult certainly for me and also for him, to kind of know where your place is. Are you black? And obviously we're half Jewish as well. And I honestly don't feel Jewish in almost any way. I guess that's mostly because of my dad, and we kind of weren't religious or anything like that. But, you can't just, turn off being black for the time that you want. And, it's a really interesting thing, being from different worlds and not kind of belonging to any world. So that's basically what that's about. So yeah, it's just a very confusing thing. It's very confusing to, like I said, be part of two different worlds, yet not belong to either, and not be accepted by either. That's the other part. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Theo. This was indeed very personal. And now I feel, going to change horizons with the next one, which is also quite fascinating, hypnotizing, I would even say, the one called DEMARIS.
This was taken in Havana. This was a project that I was doing. The project is called The Faces of Yoruba. So Yoruba is obviously the language, the main language after English now, spoken in Nigeria and parts of Benin and, that kind of part of West Africa. And my original idea for this project was to go to Cuba to learn about Santeria. And Santeria is basically the Cuban interpretation of voodoo, So voodoo was an Afro religion, which was, taken with the slaves across the Atlantic, along the transatlantic slave routes. And the slaves were obviously forced to become Christian. That did happen. Yet there was still practice their religions in secret. And the idea with the project was to kind of like pull back the curtain in a way, because voodoo in popular culture has, in the West, it certainly has a very, very kind of dark meaning and sentiment. And I kind of wasn't really, I kind of didn't really believe that. So I did a bit of research. So for instance, the whole kind of like, you know, human sacrifice and, you know, the voodoo doll and everything is just completely made up. Like there was a guy in the 19th century, a white guy, I think he was English. He went to Haiti and he basically kidnapped, I think it was 4, maybe 5 voodoo priests, and he asked them about their religion, and they said certain things, and then he didn't accept that. And so what he did is he actually tortured them for a number of days before they kind of like began to lie about the religion just to kind of stop the torture. And eventually he kind of released them, and then he wrote a book which was picked up by Hollywood in the kind of like early 1900s, in the 1915 sort of 20 time. And it was picked up by Hollywood and they started making movies about voodoo. And the book was obviously a bunch of lies, and that's kind of how it kind of seeped into popular culture. And, you know, I went there with the belief that it wasn't like that. And, you know, I was kind of weirdly accepted by these people, the practitioners of this religion. And I learned a lot. And it's nothing to do with that. Like a voodoo doll doesn't even exist, for instance. And yes, you know, there's like not human sacrifice, there's animal sacrifice. You know, they sacrifice a goat, you know, or a few chickens or whatever, which is kind of like an offering to their pantheon of gods, because there's a whole group of them. And the way that I kind of saw it, it was quite hypocritical of the West, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, the West has caused countless wars over religion over the past, you know, however many thousands of years. And, you know, millions, if not billions of people have died as a result. And if you look at Afro religions like voodoo, it's never caused a single war. You know, and people are like, oh, but, you know, they kill animals and chickens and everything, and it's, you know, it's gross or whatever. But the fact is, like, if you go to Cuba, most people don't eat very much meat. They can't afford to. You know, like a family might be lucky to have, you know, chicken or a bit of pork, like, every 3 or 4 weeks. So when they do this, it's, you know, it's not every day by any means. It's like usually like a community thing once a month, if not longer sometimes. And it's something that kind of brings the community together. It's actually a really beautiful thing, you know, if you kind of get over the fact that there is like chicken feathers all over the floor. So the story with DEMARIS was, the story with DEMARIS is I would, you know, I asked her, you know, hi, I'm Thea, what's your name? I'm a photographer. And she goes, I'm DEMARIS. And I was like, lovely to meet you. I was like, would you mind if I took your photograph? And I took it, and she kind of just gave me that look. I mean, honestly, it was like 2 or 3 photos, and that was it. It was just like that. I knew exactly there and then that I got it. But the interesting thing, I was like, so what do you do? And she goes, I'm a singer. And I was like, okay, what kind of music do you sing? She goes, well, I sing in the rituals of Santeria rituals. And she sings in a particular language called, I think it was either Lusumi or Lukumi, I can't remember exactly how you pronounce it. And it's kind of like a lexicon of words and phrases, which is derived from Yoruba, which is used in the rituals. And it's beautiful, you know, and her voice is like, I heard her sing, her voice is like an instrument. And, you know, it's very kind of passionate and it's very raw, you know, because it's kind of basically just drums and people singing, you know, and kind of, you know, I mean, I'm sure you've seen kind of videos of kind of like African kind of like dance and everything, tribal kind of dance. It's very similar to that. Yet it's happening in the middle of Cuba as a result of, you know, slavery. And that was kind of what that was about, really.
Fascinating, man. Let's proceed by alphabetical order and go to Doniel. We're not only proceeding in alphabetical order, we're also proceeding, I would say, in terms of tones, in terms of color, in terms of what you call shades of gray. And these are the same shades. So I'm assuming this has been done also in Havana, in Cuba. Can you tell us a bit more about that young boy, Doniel?
So, Doniel, this was actually, I think it was actually taken on the same day as DEMARIS, at the same place. So there was this place where, they would sing and dance and everything, and it was all, it was where kind of everyone like hung out on a Sunday, and, it was all about kind of like, this is the thing, the thing that kind of I found really interesting about this whole project was in Africa, voodoo has become very underground, and that is a direct result of colonialism, especially kind of like evangelical Christian colonialism. The white people turned up and they were like, what you do is black magic, and it is wrong and it is awful, and what you should do is you should learn about our Lord and Saviour, Jesus Christ, blah, 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 blah. And like I said, as a result, it's become very underground, and it's kind of become almost quite shameful in Africa. But the kind of major difference with Cuba and places like in the Caribbean especially, and I guess also in Brazil, things like candomblé, is that it's basically it's a way for these people who are obviously transplanted there many hundreds of years ago, where their ancestors were taken there, stolen really, and it was a way of them keeping hold of home, when they obviously could never get back, and it was incredibly powerful to see the kind of like African pride so far away from Africa in the diaspora as it is, and I spoke to numerous Cuban people while I was there, and not a single one has ever been to Africa. No one really, I mean, they have an idea of where they came from, but only because, all the slaves were taken from the West Coast pretty much, there or thereabouts. So it's kind of like, it's become a culture within Cuban culture to be proud of who you are and where you're from. And Doniel he was just a kid. And, he proudly wore, they wear these beads on their wrists. And it's essentially a way of saying that you are a child of your particular god. You get prescribed a god, basically. They're called orishas. And I spoke to him about it. He was only, I think, 8 years old or something. And he was speaking so proudly of who he is and, what it means to him and everything. And that's why I took the photo. It was beautiful. And I was truly blown away by that. Because, living in, the UK, for instance, often black culture kind of gets like washed out because of the kind of people that, or the kind of society around it, and it's kind of appropriated and it's, whatever else. And so it kind of gets watered down. Whereas in Cuba, if anything, granted it's, often the things are in Spanish, well, the people speak Spanish. I think it's the only kind of major difference. It's kind of it's almost a lot more pure there, this kind of version of voodoo, than it is in Africa.
Okay, let us now end up with the most symbolical one of the We the People series, Black Fist in the Air, and a photograph called Power. It's an image we've seen on timeless accounts, on numerous occasions, but I'm sure it has a very specific significance to you, and I'd like to hear that.
You know, this has always been a hugely, I guess, powerful and kind of strong image for me. You know, the Black Power salute, you know, during the Olympics, you know, it was an image that I grew up with. And my mum, you know, has always kind of pushed us to learn more about kind of Black power and Black culture and everything. And this was obviously as a result, I took this photo as a result of, you know, what happened with George Floyd and, you know, all the counts of the, you know, police brutality killings in the USA and abroad. But it kind of, to me, it kind of means a little bit more, you know, because I don't think people necessarily understand the nature of racism. Racism, you know, has changed from what it was in, you know, the first part of the 20th century and before to what it is today. You know, you kind of don't really get, you know, I mean, obviously it still happens to some degree, but you don't really get so much kind of like outward racism. At least it's nowhere near as much as what you used to get back in the day, you know, when the KKK would ride into your town on horseback and, you know, kill or hang or, you know, rape or whatever it was, you know, that they were doing. And, you know, it's kind of, you know, Black people on paper still have the same amount of rights and, you know, they're allowed to vote and blah, 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 etc. The major difference is that racism has become systematic and structural. So, you know, in the US, you kind of almost know more about what you're dealing with. You know, you kind of like, you'll have some, you know, cracker being like, you fucking, you know, nigger or whatever. And you know where you stand with him. He hates you, you know, full stop. Whereas the difference is, like in the UK, which it kind of never really, I never really thought about it until relatively recently, when, you know, it kind of like really like lit a match underneath me. It's just kind of so much more insidious. I mean, you know, if you look at power structures within the UK, I mean, there's, you know, almost none. There's very few Black MPs, you know, and that, I can't see that changing anytime soon. Not only that, but, you know, you look at the BBC and you look about the kind of people in charge of the BBC, and there's, you know, it's very white and also very male. And you know, it's the same with you know, the law. You know, there's not, I've never even heard of a Black judge in the UK. I mean, I'm sure there are some, but there's very few. And it's this photo is kind of as a reaction to that, to the fact that, you know, kind of obviously kind of like Black is beautiful and everything, but it's kind of more, there's more that Black is power. And I kind of wanted to kind of make a really powerful image that basically just said that. And to me, that was it. This is my hand. And, you know, I feel that I'm as capable as anybody else, you know, white, Black or whatever. And that is the symbol of that for me. I'm not suggesting that any race should be on top of any other race by any means. But it's, you know, it's kind of like a fight for equality and, you know, a fight for, you know, equal opportunity. And it's a kind of stand against injustice. You know, injustice is something I felt for a very long time. Not just racially, but kind of just, you know, generally. And it's really important to me that my kids, if I have kids, that is, you know, live in a world that is more just than the one that we currently live in. And, you know, it's a beacon for the future. It's a sign to rise up. It's a rallying call. And it's you know, it's a hugely important thing to me. So that's what that's about.
Thank you very much, Theo. We'd like to remind everyone listening to this podcast episode that We the People, the exhibition, is running until the 30th of September at the Spot Geneva, 2-4 Rue de Diorama, close to the Plein Palais neighborhood. We are very proud of this exhibition and we invite you all to come and see it. Art at the Spot, this is Omar.